Before we start this episode, I'd like to take a moment to thank the patrons of The Model Philosopher. Thank you to Scott, The Plastic Scholar, Lee Fogel, Resurrected DM, Eddie, Frank, Robert, Stephen, Christian, Carlos, Paul, Bruce the Model Noob, Shafe, Pascal, Philippe, James, John, Eric, Matt, and Dennis. Your support is really appreciated. If you'd like to support the show through Patreon, please do go to patreon.com/themodelphilosopher or check the address in the show notes for this episode. Welcome to episode 7 of The Model Philosopher. My name is Chris Meddings and I'm here to bring you interesting chat and guests talking about the philosophical side of modelling, the why we do it rather than maybe the how. This episode I'm joined by my very good friend David Parker. David has been in modelling for a very long time and is an expert scratch builder, co-founder of 2 magazines, AFV and Air Modeler, author of books such as Scrapyard Armour and Crew School. David is so exact in everything he does, and that's why I wanted to get him on today to talk about realism and precision in modelling. Now, before we get to that, I'd just like to thank our sponsors, Scale Model Challenge. Scale Model Challenge is for me the best show in the modelling calendar. This year, on the 19th and 20th of October, with some workshops running on the 18th as well, you can enjoy some of the best modelling the world has to offer, with people coming from every continent to bring their latest works and to hang out and talk modelling with each other. There's a world-leading competition, over 150 traders, club stands, and all the social side that you would want from the best show in the world. Recently, they've also opened pre-registration for your models, so go to scalemodelchallenge.com to register now for the competition and to take advantage of the discounted rate for registering early. That's scalemodelchallenge.com. All right, back to this episode's interview with David Parker. Let's hear from David now. David Parker, welcome to The Model Philosopher. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Now, we've spoken, well, we've known each other a long time anyway, but people may have heard your interview on the Sprue Cutters Union will know that you're very dedicated to realism and accuracy in modelling.
Yeah, I guess you could say that, yeah.
For those who don't know, who live under a rock, can you tell us what you do in modelling? Now, people might associate you with AFE Modeler, but there's a lot of other things as well.
I am one of the founders of AFE and Air Modeler magazine, and these days I'm doing less with that and more with 3D design and print. I've written a few books on various things at various times, probably best known for my book Super King, which detailed my 3.5-year project to completely fix the trumpeter King Tiger. And that's really my direction of travel at the moment, is large-scale detailing and working exclusively in 16th scale.
The funny thing about the Super King was that was maybe the last full big project you did purely scratch building without any 3D. Is that fair?
No, I think the majority of the Panzer IV was scratch built.
Yeah. But your transition was during that project.
Yeah, towards the end of it, I suddenly discovered 3D print and design, and that was that. I haven't really looked back since. So yeah, but I would say 95% of that project was done traditionally. All the tricky bits were done traditionally. There was a couple of bits like the design of the main body of the engine and one of the fan units and things that somebody helped me out by designing that for me. But the rest of it was putty and plastic card and bits of brass wire and all that stuff. So,
But I remember seeing articles she wrote years ago for other people, before AFE Modeler even, about scratch building and detailing and essentially making kits more accurate.
Yeah. Yeah, I used to write for military modelling in the late 90s, early 2000s. And that was my thing there as well, I think, was fixing things, correcting things, not always being satisfied with how things came in the box. So it's a long road for me of doing that sort of attention to detail. And there's been a lot, there's been a huge sort of learning curve to get there, to the point where you can sort of scratch build large parts of the interior of a tank, because you've developed that sort of skill base, and purely to sort of drive that sort of project, I suppose. I guess if you're not comfortable doing that, you're not gonna push yourself to do it, are you? You're probably gonna just build things and as they come and paint them nicely. Yeah.
I think confidence is a big part of it. I think what puts a lot of people off big scratch building projects or detailing or what have you is they don't feel they have the skills, and therefore they don't really know where to start. I think once you've done a lot of it, it's just a job. Then it's just a task, and mentally you can break it down and you can take it on because you know you can do it. If you don't know how to do something, you have the ability to find a way to do it.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think there's a confidence that comes from knowing you can pretty well tackle anything that might be thrown at you. But um, at the same time, the only way you get that is by stepping into the unknown a little bit from time to time, pushing yourself to extend, and learn new techniques, or you discover a way of doing something out of need because there was no other way of doing it. So um, yeah, I think that's certainly my experience of it. Anyway, I remember, there's been times when I was a lot younger where I didn't have all those techniques and abilities and skills, and things were far more frustrating as a result, I think. So, but I think that's what motivates me anyway. I'm not saying it's a must-have sort of set of skills or a route that everybody wants to follow, but for me, that's. And I don't. It's interesting. I'm just thinking there. Do I miss not doing stuff traditionally? And I don't think I do really. So I think that's probably a set of skills that I'm now going to lose because I'm not using them. But that's the way it is.
I think when we spoke before, we talked about sort of the craft of scratch building, and it seemed to me that you weren't really the craft of it didn't really interest. It was a result that interests you.
Yeah,
It's what you can get from making it the best way you can make it.
yeah. It's always the result. It's always It's sure there's something really nice about having a particular complicated piece of machinery recreated with lots of little brass nuts, and um, you know, and you take some photos of it and it looks great and it's all clean, but then ultimately you're going to paint it, so it's just it doesn't really matter. And now I can get something that has that finish and appeal off a 3D printer, but is even better because all the nuts are exactly placed, and all the castellated nuts that you can't really do because they're too small, and all these sorts of things. The regularity, the repetition of parts, the regular spacing, all those things that as a scratch builder you struggle to achieve, And I'm notoriously, in my own mind anyway, notoriously lazy about measuring out distances.
You and me both.
So I just, I'll kind of try and judge my eye and stick them on and realize I've got it wrong and have to move them a bit. Instead of measuring them and marking points, I never learn for things like that. I just always try and just guess it. So,
But with 3D, with Fusion or whatever, you draw one, you give it an axis, tell it a pattern and distance, and pop, there it is, it's done.
yeah. Yeah.
The only thing you've got to do there is manually go along and turn every nut so they're not all exactly the same
Yeah.
orientation.
If you really want to be fiddly about it, yes, you can, and I do that because I can hear people in my head sometimes going, oh, it would have been nice if you'd adjusted all the nuts on that so they weren't all facing the same way. So, but yeah, it's for me, that's a whole new thing of a new. It's a whole different sort of satisfaction. It's the same as it's creative. It's incredibly creative, and can be sometimes just as challenging to get to recreate something with the accuracy I want it to have, and then there's that excitement of waiting for it to come off the printer. It's fantastic. It's what gets me in the office every morning, seeing what's seeing what's printed.
What's come out
Yeah,
overnight.
it's brilliant.
But the goal of your scratchbuilding and your 3D design has always been, I think it's fair to say, a pursuit of realism.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
Do you think realism is central to scale modelling?
Well, I think it needs to be right up there because it's the difference between a photograph and a sketch. Otherwise, isn't it? You know, if you if you're not if you're satisfied with a rough sketch of the car that you've got parked outside, then that's all right. But it's not an exact scale model of it. And whereas a photograph of it will give you a lot better and more accurate representation of what it is and what it looks like and what color it is, um, and that's the thing for me is uh, if you're making a model, your scale. My aim is to reproduce whatever it is at a particular size so that it looks like the real thing. Because otherwise, it's not a model of that. It's just a vague thing. It's a car or it's a tank or it's a Spitfire, but it's not a Mark 9 Spitfire. It's just a Spitfire because it's got elliptical wings or whatever. I think if you don't have that focus on getting things accurate and real and replicated properly, then you're on that kind of drift off to sort of into all sorts of vague areas. There's a huge satisfaction in knowing that you've got the model as accurate as you possibly can, given those caveats of some unknown bit of information that you didn't have at the time, because that's part of the challenge, surely. And I also, for me, the thing is to make it look. The finishing needs to deceive you into thinking, if it's photographed, that it's actually the real model. It's a real vehicle. If you can trick somebody into first glance, they think that's a real model, a real tank or a real airplane, because of the way you've finished it, but also a little bit of sympathetic photography and lighting will help. Then I think that's mission accomplished, as far as I'm concerned, anyway. Now, when I finished my Panzer IV, I took the time to take it outside and set it up and photograph it against some hedgerows and things. And in the right bit of sunlight, to me, it looked like a real, what I think one of those vehicles would look like operating in Normandy in the summer of 1944. And I think that was my aim at the beginning, was to reproduce a particular vehicle with all its foibles, all its little bits of damage, all its markings, and have it look as real as I could make it from inside and outside. So yeah, that's the challenge I set myself, I think, with things, and actually, I've just come back from the beach this afternoon, where the weather defeated me because when I left the office, it was sunny, and then when we got there, it clouded over as soon as we got out of the car. But I took my SAS Jeep down there to try and get some sand dune shots to sort of make it look a little bit North African and a little less Northumberland. And actually, even with the cloudy conditions, I've got some really nice shots, so I'm quite pleased about that. But it's also that's interesting, an interesting one as well. So I was discussing I couldn't get the shots I wanted in the studio with it. I shot it on white. It didn't didn't look right on a white background. I shot it on a black background. It looked a bit better, but it was creating a lot of shadows and things. So I wasn't entirely happy with that. I shot it on a neutral grey. That wasn't right either. But I've managed to get some really nice shots outside with it. So I think that's probably the way to go. But
some of the photos of aircraft I love the most are the ones in Scale Aviation magazine that Noah Krasovitz does, where he goes out at 6 o'clock in the morning and gets the early sunlight on a model
yes,
to make it look like it's out on
yeah,
a runway somewhere.
yeah, yeah. And one of the Japanese magazines is very good at doing that. Um, the name of which escapes me at the moment, but they do often do that with the models and photograph them, against, as you say, a sunrise or a sunset or whatever, and some of them look so convincing and so real. Yeah, it's a technique in itself. It's not, it's not always easy to get that result. And obviously, studio photography is a lot easier to control than shooting outside. But when you pull it off, it's really good. Yeah.
You get a result you just can't get in the studio,
Yeah.
no matter
Yeah.
how well you control
I
them.
mean, I've developed ways of trying to sort of create like a strong sunlight effect for sort of like a desert thing. But you end up fiddling around with backgrounds and flashlights and it's not always successful. When it works, it's great, but it doesn't always.
So do you think for you, modelling is about producing an accurate, scaled down replica of a real physical thing?
Yeah, no, that's exactly what it's about. And I mean, there's bits that come off that as well. Like, I will quite, it's not often that I build a vehicle and not put figures with it.
Mm.
And I'm not sure why I do that in a way, but it's not that I'm a huge diorama maker or diorama storyteller, because I'm not. It's not one of my strong points, I've come to realise. But I do like to populate the thing somehow.
I think somehow it makes it feel more real if you have something human scale next to it.
Yeah, can do. The Jeep is a good example, I suppose. So I hadn't built anything for 2 years before I finished the Jeep, and I'd lost so much muscle memory and just skill in that 2 year period. I was quite shocked at how bad things were to start with, but bit by bit it came back, and painting the figures was quite a challenge, having not done it for such a long time. And I think there's always a challenge there with combining what I might call the more theatrical painting techniques of sort of fake shadows and all that sort of thing with a vehicle that hasn't got any of that, so that the two don't sort of jar with each other. A bit like if you had in this hypothetical model, your driver's got a painted non-metallic shiny helmet sitting in the seat, but then the rest of the bits in the vehicle are painted with proper metallic colours. There'd be quite a sort of jarring of those two approaches, I think. So there's a little bit of that goes on, I think. Like I was aware in that you're travelling in an open topped vehicle in a dusty environment, and the people are going to get quite dusty as well. But it's quite hard to sort of dust. If you're not careful, it just looks like you're just a rubbish figure painter. Because
or you've left it in the cabinet for 2 months and it's just dusted on its own.
There's a little bit of a balance there to be had, but yeah.
Dust has a very deadening, flattening effect, and it's
well, on a figure where you're using darker tones to create your shadows and things that define the volume of the thing. They would be the dark. Those recesses would be probably where the dust collects. So then to put a light coloured dust into there, it's kind of counterintuitive, isn't it? It's almost going to give you a negative effect. So
I think it's harder to paint figures in a naturalistic, realistic style
yeah,
than it is to paint vehicles.
I would agree with that.
And like you say, it's not what people expect either, which is the issue. When they look at the figure, they'll see, oh, it's not very well painted. Whereas what you've done is you've tried to make it look real.
Yeah, yeah. So you haven't, and this was a weird one as well because one of the things I tried to do was create a distinct sunburn effect because I figured these guys are driving around without any, any protection from the sun.
No factor 50 by
No
much.
factor 50 and and no hats and this sort of thing as well, or so I tried to sort of I went quite red with my flesh tones as a result, thinking about how the average Englishman goes, in,
Instantly.
yeah. And there was a point where I thought I might have overdone that, but I was pleased when people saw it. They remarked on the fact they could see this that they were sunburned. I thought, well, that's what I was trying to achieve. So, in that respect, I think that was successful. But it was a bit of a gamble because had it not worked, I'd have been back to square one really with it. So
The issue I find with realism quite often is you do it very, very well, but I see quite a lot of people who pick and choose their realism, if you see what I mean. So, particularly with aircraft modelers, I'm thinking I see people saying, well, you can't see panel lines at scale distance, so I'm not going to put panel lines on. And you can't see, the color has to be exactly like the real one. But then they're quite happy to not put brake lines on landing gear or to use a kit canopy that's, would be scale 6-inch thick or something.
yeah,
And I find it quite strange, but I mean, I suppose there is always a line. And for people who go as far as possible, the line is physics. How thin can I make something before it will fail physically then. But I do find that line varies a lot.
yeah. I think things like canopies. I would agree. But then I think there's always that fear of destroying the only canopy piece that you've got in an attempt to sort of thin it or whatever. But yeah, there's a lot of that selective, um, you know, focus on detail where it's convenient, and then, mind you, I'm not a great one for sort of detailing, the underside of things that I can't see, or that nobody's ever going to see. I don't see the point in that. So, and it's amazed me how as an example, the Das Work SDK is a 251 half track, and they provided all the workings of the mechanics from the sort of from the engine right the way back down the hull underneath the floor. And in a normal vehicle with the floor fitted, none of that is visible. And yet, almost every single person I've seen build the model has put all of that in meticulously, and then they've painted it all meticulously,
Yeah.
and then put the floor on and covered it all over. And I didn't bother with any of that. I started putting bits of it in. And I thought, what am I doing this for? This is just so a huge amount of work for something that I've no intention of exposing, or I'm not lifting the floor out. I want a representative vehicle that's in operation. The floor will be on, the seats will be in. So just skip those stages and get on with it. And yet they'll do all that, but then they'll ignore the fact that I don't know, the wheels are all wrong or something. They'll just kind of go, "Oh, I'm happy with that."
But things on a vehicle that size, which are visibly very, are an issue. And so if you're going to ignore something that's visibly an issue,
Yeah.
yet put all the effort into something that's hidden,
Yes.
it's a strange
thing.
thing
But
to do.
it's an interesting thing where, because the manufacturer's given people that option, well, it's all there in the box. You can build all these bits under the floor, and everybody just goes right, just follows it. I mean, they've done a cracking job with it. It's all there, and it takes quite some building. It's not just 3 pieces of plastic to stick under the floor. There's about it's probably a couple of hundred parts to sort of put under there.
Good grief.
Just to connect.
That's not a day's work,
Well,
is
no,
it?
it's really complicated. But as I say, what And likewise, the engine bay, again, they've done, it's all there, it's all very lovely. But if I'm not opening the front hatches, I don't bother.
I mean, I'm someone that will always build it just because it's there, and I enjoy sticking bits of plastic together and painting them, whether someone sees it or not.
Mm.
But I do think a lot of the times when it's built, there's kind of a thing of we're getting a bit off the subject here, but I'm going to go there anyway. It's a bit of a sort of a performative social media modeling that they do it to take photographs of it to put on the internet,
Yeah, that's possibly a thing. Yeah, I would kind of agree. Yeah,
or maybe they just enjoy it. I don't know, but I do think that's something which kind of afflicts modeling. Full stop. Is this, you know, I'm building something at the moment, and no one knows what it is, and no one will know what it is until Scale Model Challenge when I put it on the table.
right.
Just because I think it's fun to not put stuff on the internet sometimes, just to drop it fully
Yeah, I
finished
did that with the
without.
Jeep. I didn't tell anybody that I was trying to finish it for the K&K show, and just sort of turned up with it. Um,
None of that how the sausage is made stuff. Just produce the sausage cooked.
yeah, and it's an interesting experience, isn't it? When you're used to posting stuff as you're working on it, and then suddenly not to. Um, uh,
You find yourself as you're doing it thinking about how you're going to photograph it,
yeah, but also
but you're not going to photograph it.
you realise you get quite a lot of satisfaction from sharing your progression as well.
Mhm.
Um, because if you've just done something and you're really pleased with it, um, there is that sort of urge just to go look at this. I've just got this thing here, and it's all fitted and looks great, you know. Um, and it's not because not because you need somebody else to say yes, it looks great, because you either think it looks
Yeah.
great or you don't, you know, and you're the arbiter of what you're doing. So, but it's nice to have that. I think it helps the project roll as well, doesn't it? Sometimes, you know, it's it's quite insular when you're just working on something in secret, shall we say, off media.
This is going to sound really weird. If there's any psychologists listening, please tell me what's going on in my head. But it's kind of like when I was a smoker. I would do like an hour of work, 2 hours of work, and then reward myself with a
Well,
cigarette. And now it's like I do a couple of hours of modeling and reward myself by posting it on the internet.
yeah,
It's really strange.
yeah, there's a little bit of that. Yeah, I would say. But do you find that then when is it a different thing building in secret?
I've got used to it now.
Mm,
Like smoking again, it's a habit
mm,
to post it. It becomes even the way you think about how you build and how you do things. When you do it a lot, like for publication and stuff like that, you build in a certain way which makes it easier to photograph and to describe.
mm,
If you see what I mean,
mm.
you kind of construct it with the article in mind as you're going,
Yeah,
and that influences how you build. And to be free of that is fantastic because I used to have a process because it's easier to explain to people how you paint and weather and things if it's a process that happens in a certain order.
yeah,
But now I don't have to explain it. My process is all over the place. I might have painted it and done some weathering and done some oils and done some pigments and then think I'm going to go back in there and spray something on there
mm,
just to change that color or something.
yeah,
So it doesn't have to be a linear process. You can just use whatever tool you want whenever you want,
yeah, yeah,
which is nice.
yeah, yeah.
But anyway, realism and stuff, eh?
Mm.
Um, now, the thing is with accuracy, and this is another internet thing actually, we've never had more information available at our fingertips than we have now.
Yes.
But I kind of feel like when I'm researching something, and I come, especially when you come up against it with a subject which isn't so popular, isn't so well known, it's hard to find reliable information because you're reliant on quite often hobbyists who post information who might not have a complete understanding. Like, for instance, if you're looking at you when you built your Panther 4, you built a very specific Panther
Mm.
4 that was made at a certain factory
Yeah,
and was knocked out on a certain day in
yeah,
Normandy, and had a full history
yeah.
that you could sort of research. How do you go about researching so that you're confident of what it is you're researching?
Well, you have to there comes a point where you have to rely on a degree of judgment if you can't, or guesswork, I suppose, sometimes, because you just can't get the information that you need. Or yeah, so the other day I built a 3D modelled this periscope site based on the photographs that I had, and clearly in the picture there was like one of those bands that ran around the top of the scope, which had a sort of this clamp screwed together sort of thing at the back to sort of clamp it in place. And it was sort of some sort of shiny metal, and the rest of the scope was whatever colour. It was a black and white image, so it's hard to be sure. Anyway, so I replicated all that, put it all in. I could see these two clasps on the sides. I put them on. And then literally the next day, somebody sent me some pictures of a preserved one that somebody had dug out of somewhere and was trying to sell. And it was suddenly I got a whole different aspect on this thing. I could see the clips I'd done weren't quite fat enough. Also, this silver band running around it wasn't there at all. And I looked at the pictures again, and they were like a Tech Intel report photo. And I thought, I know that's been broken. Somebody's tried to clamp that together with this. It's not an original part of the scope. It's a sort of fix to sort of just to test it with. So then I had to go back and make those changes. But that's just a little example there of you suddenly get that little nugget of information, and it changes. I find it really difficult if I can't exactly see what's going on, and I might have to make a judgment or make a guesstimate of what might be happening. I feel very unhappy about having to do that on those occasions it happens. I suppose the good thing is you can use your experience to sort of, certain, like the German army tended to, or the German engineers would tend to tackle things in particular ways, and you get a feel for how they do things. You get a feel for how things might be fixed, or how they're clamped on, or what sort of clamp it might be, or whatever. So that helps because you can kind of bring that knowledge into it and go, well, they're more likely to do this than they were to do something else. So, and the rest of it, I mean, as you say, we've never been so deluged with information. You can search the internet, but it amazes me, sometimes it works in your favor, and I get pictures I never imagined I'd find that show me all sorts of things. It's usually off things like eBay where people are selling them and they've photographed it from all around and giving you the dimensions. You go, this is fantastic. So that can work, and then there's other times where there's absolutely nothing. You go, why is this? And you do all these, put different searches in, and still it throws up nothing. Or completely unrelated things. And that's just, I guess it's just the way it is sometimes, isn't it? But we've never had more access to the information. I think anybody who started modelling in the 1980s will appreciate it. They didn't really used to have a couple of reference books, and that was it. And there was nowhere else to go apart from your local library, which you knew how much your reference had been there. Probably nothing really. Or you'd have a Bologna print or something, with tiny drawings that were the size of smaller than the palm of your hand. Just.
I think you do need a certain amount of experience, though, and judgment, not just of the subject, but of you sort of develop a bullshit meter for information as well, so that you can tell what's good and what isn't.
You can. Yeah, I think you've got to be aware that you might not have the full picture as well, and be open to someone going, well, have you seen this photo here? Because this clearly shows this, that, and the other. And then you go, why didn't you show me that before? I printed 200 of them.
At least with parametric CAD, though, unlike a handmaster, well, I suppose you can do it with a handmaster, but it's a lot more of a pain in the ass. You can go back 100 steps and change something.
Doesn't and then, always quite as easy as that, but yes, you can. You change one thing back, and then the whole thing goes to shit.
Yes, when it disappears off the screen, you think, "Oh crap!"
You have to retrace your way back step by step, to see where the problem is. Yeah. No, I think it's to be embraced. But there are things where there isn't any. The reason you can't find any information about it is because there isn't any. I'm working on the Puma at the moment, and they give you a sort of fairly simple breech for the inside the turret, which is fairly visible through the hatches, and it's rubbish to be fairly blunt about it. There's a vague resemblance.
Have you seen the mini art one?
Yeah, I've seen some pictures of it, and that's far more what it should look like. But I can't find any. I can't find any photos of the real thing. So, which then presents me with a dilemma. Do I kind of just assume it's fairly like the 5 centimeter long barreled mount in the Panzer III, but with some changes, or do I just kind of say I'm not doing it, or I don't know.
So, I mean, a term that gets thrown out around a lot, and I think with little actual sort of consistency in a lot of ways, because it's just more of an insult than anything else. How do you feel about the term rivet counter?
Oh, I absolutely detest it. Yeah, it makes my blood boil, which is probably what it's supposed to do for people like me who are interested in getting things right. But then, I'm trying to promote the term detail deniers as a sort of counter to it.
Yeah, assemblers doesn't quite do it, does it?
Yeah, no, detail denier, because it's like a blind refusal to accept that things might not be quite as detailed as they need to be. But no, it's just it's flung about with as you say, it's used as an insult just to kind of, if anybody dares point out anything that might not be completely correct, or then you're onto the whole, well, I'm just having fun with it. Well, that's fair enough, but shutting down the discussion is just, it's a bit like, in a similar way, I see there's a huge proliferation of these colorized World War II pictures at the moment.
Yeah.
And some of them one or two of them are really well done, but the majority are just absolute garbage. And they seem to be flooding Facebook at the moment. And I just wonder how many people are going to start basing models on these images.
I think the issue is a lot of people, I don't know, but there are certainly people out there who can't tell the difference.
Yeah, that's probably true. But I think you may not be bothered that your Puma has got the wrong type of wheels on it, because you just don't care. You just want a model of a Puma, and that fits the bill. But if it's being pointed out that it's got the wrong kind of wheels on for everybody reading the thread, that's a bit of knowledge you've got there that's then quite powerful, because if you want to do it and you want to get it right, you've got that knowledge that the wheels need changing. You may choose to ignore it, or you may never use that information. But I think by stamping on it and going, you're just being a rivet counter, and we're not listening to what you're saying, it's like sticking your head in the ground, isn't it? Really, no.
It's kind of an aggressive ignorance.
Yeah, it's like being willful ignorance about things. It's like, I don't.
I mean, not necessarily for the person whose model it was, but like you say, for everyone else reading it, you're denying everyone else that information, or the ability to have that information.
Yeah, and how does it harm you to sort of accept, to take that in?
I never have understood why they don't just say, "That's good, thanks for letting me know."
Yeah.
I'm not too bothered about it personally. What's wrong with that?
It's like everybody, every time I see a model of the 1968 Tamiya Panther, I kind of cringe a bit, because it's getting back to what we started at the beginning. It's a sketch of a panther. It's not a photograph. It's vague. It vaguely resembles a panther, but there's so many things wrong with it that that mean it isn't a panther. It's just something that vaguely resembles one. And there's a sort of, again, there's a thing where people, because it's a cheap kit, that seems to overrule everything else. I don't care it doesn't look like a panther, because it only cost me whatever it was.
I used to see this when I worked in the model shop, a few years ago. I can't remember whose. I think that might have been Tamiya's own Panther came out. The was it D, the most recent one they released?
Yes, yeah,
It had that really nice figure of the guy sort of peeking
yeah,
over the turret.
yeah. Nice model.
Yeah. But when that came out, they re-released the 1969 one. And a lot of people said, why are they re-releasing this old kit? Or every time someone else's more expensive version of something comes out, Tamiya re-pop their old kit.
Mm.
Everyone says, why are you re-releasing it? But it's for those guys for whom money is the most important factor.
Mm.
And they don't really care that it doesn't look like the real thing. It's roughly the right shape and it's cheaper. That's all they care about.
But it doesn't even build nicely. It's a horrible
No,
thing to put together. I
I
remember
remember.
struggling to put it together as a child, as a boy. It was just not as I built other. I remember having this nasty shock because I built as you do, you're working your way with your pocket money through various things from Tamiya, and I built like the 222 and the M3 half track and a couple of other things, and then suddenly this Panther, and it was just, what the hell's this? Just
It doesn't deserve to be a
doesn't
Tamiya kit, really,
doesn't
does it?
fit, and this doesn't join here, and the tracks want to pull the wheels off. They're under such huge tension, and just awful thing. I think it's that willful ignorance about things is just so.
It's funny because they say rivet counters ruin the hobby, but I think that ignorance is what damages the hobby. I think because it stops other people learning and it stops other people. It assumes that no one wants to develop.
Yes, it's
Uh,
and also it assumes that people who are concerned about accuracy and realism and things are not having fun because of
yeah,
it. That one is mutually exclusive. I'm having just as much fun, thanks, sorting on doing all my little bits of fiddly nonsense as you are slapping something together, and silvering the decals. That's, you know, in fact, I think I'm having more fun actually because proportionally, my model takes me 7 years to finish, so I've had 7 years of fun. You've had
I feel like
3 evenings.
you're squeezing every ounce of enjoyment out of it.
Yeah, there's a huge satisfaction in that, isn't there? There's a satisfaction
Yeah.
in the research. There's a satisfaction in the accuracy in getting things in that knowledge, the knowledge that's accrued across that process. There's a satisfaction in having to make bits yourself, to fix problems, to problem solve, and then to bring it all together in a way that kind of is convincing at the end of it. Yeah, I find it interesting that we're in a hobby where the very sort of pinnacle of what people can do with plastic kits is derided as, in some way, a bizarre thing to do with it. It's a bit like deriding the guy who can run the 100 meters the fastest because
Yeah.
you're quite happy, the people crawling around the track are having fun. It's a bizarre thing.
The thing that goes with it, which winds me up as well, is this idea a lot of people come up with that on Facebook groups, social media groups, and what have you, that no criticism unless it's asked for.
Yeah.
And in fact, I left the group recently because I asked, so is criticism always a bad thing? Inherently, is criticism a bad thing? They said yes. I said, well, of course it isn't. And these are people who probably are quite happy shouting at Gareth Southgate on the TV, or
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. No.
or saying they didn't enjoy a meal or something, and asking to see the manager in a restaurant. But when it comes to their models, somehow it's like their baby, and you can't say anything about it. And what annoys me about it is it puts their philosophy or whatever that criticism is always a bad thing onto everyone else because it creates a restriction for everyone else who might not necessarily share it.
It's like my one man feels like my one man crusade. Or, Elfenbein cream on the inside of German tanks, but because everywhere you go, you see them painted white. Just I've given up mentioning it now unless somebody asks specifically about it. But But again,
The funny thing is, it's a more attractive colour.
that misinformation just is self-perpetuating, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because people are just copying other people who got it wrong in the first place.
Well, that goes back to what I was asking earlier about the quality of the information, that modelers tend to repeat what they've seen other modelers say rather than information they've researched and found in a primary source.
Yeah. That's why I sort of struggle against it, because I think I could just scroll by and not say anything. But there's sometimes when I just think, no, that needs, we've seen it. You see it so many times when somebody asks a question and somebody gives the correct, factually perfect response in the first two responses. And then there's 50 other people chime in with all sorts of mad guesses or suppositions or just absolute stuff they've just made up. And, it's just so frustrating, because then how does anybody know? If you're reading that thread and you don't know what the answer is, you have the answer right at the beginning, but it's been swamped with 50 idiots who've just made something up because they think they know. And then how does anybody else know which is the right answer? It's interesting, isn't it? Because there's so much, it's the information age, and yet that is sort of almost self-destructing itself because of people's willingness to just speculate about things that they don't really know because they can.
There's one common modelling trope that I know is one of your accuracy buttons, so I'm going to push it right now. Scale colour.
Scale colour.
Yeah.
Nurse.
I'll put 50p in the meter.
Oh dear. Yeah, I've had some proper arguments with people on the internet, which I should learn, really. But yeah, scale colours utter garbage.
I think your Ferrari answer is probably the
most the Ferrari answer is the one where, because for those who don't understand the scale colour concept, the basic principle is that if something is a smaller scale, that all the colours, all the paint on it should be proportionally lighter the smaller it gets. Otherwise, it gets too dark, and then
it's a pseudoscience, isn't it?
Yeah,
atmospheric particles.
That's right. Which, agreed. If you're looking across a valley, from 4 miles away, then things do look a bit different on the other side. But that doesn't really apply to models. But because you can't control the viewing distance for a start. And then, so if you're lightening your colours, the first trope I argue with is nobody will ever tell you what percentage of lightening per scale is required. So if it's that certain, why can't you tell me? If it's a 16 scale model, how much lighter does it need to be? And then the other thing is, what do I do with my red Ferrari to lighten that colour to make it scale? Because if you add anything, whether it's yellow or white or anything to try and lighten the tone, you're not going to have a red Ferrari anymore. You're going to have a pink one or an orange one. And I've also got some great pictures of a whole row of red Ferraris, about 50 cars, and you can see the colour doesn't change down this row at all.
Yeah.
Within the limits of the photograph, because by the end they're getting really, really small because it's just the bonnets sticking out. And also another one with I've got a photo of a whole load of tanks and a train photographed from above, and you can see them stretching off for however long down the track. And again, the colours don't change. They're all the same colour from front to back. So
I think the other thing is that the distance they're talking about, let's say a tiger tank, if you looked at it and it was so far away that it was light enough to colour it, it would be like 2 millimeters long.
Yeah.
Because it would have to be that far away.
It is nonsense, but it's another one of those things that just perpetuates, which is why you see all these sort of powder blue German tanks, because people have added 50% white to their Panzer Grey. Whereas in fact it's an incredibly dark grey colour to be almost appearing black in certain conditions. And there's plenty now of really good quality period archive photos that clearly show that it's not some sort of pale blue colour. And yeah, it's one of those things that just needs stamping out. I think. Never mind roof accounting. Just get people to paint things the right colour and stop mucking around with lightening up things. Yeah.
Now, full disclosure, I used to be very much accuracy or death, basically. Give me accuracy or give me death. But I hate this phrase, an artistic modeler now, where I'd rather sort of,
I'm resisting the urge to swear at this point.
yeah, I know, I hate that phrase. Where for me, it is more about creating a sort of a mood or an atmosphere than it is about being 100% accurate. However, I do think there's as many ways to look at modeling as there are modelers, and I got you on because I wanted to put a totally different point of view to the other ones I've had on about modeling
Mm.
and art and so on, because this show is about to be is supposed to be about all ideas, not just the ones approved of by the by the owner. But also, I get what you're saying because although it's although it's not something I do myself anymore, I really do appreciate it as an approach, and I really do.
Mm.
I think it's 100% consistent and valid and laudable. To be honest, actually, I think it's kind of the default of modelling. It's like you say, to create a scale version of a rig. I mean, that is, you know, the definition of modelling, isn't it? To
Yeah, it
create a
is.
small
It is.
version of a
It's
bigger
very
thing. So
nature. Yeah.
my version's a perversion of the true nature of
Yeah.
modelling.
You could probably get some help with that.
Oh God, the things I need help with. Uh, but for you, do you think modelling is more engineering or art?
Mm, that's a good question. Um, I don't think it's wholly one thing or the other. I think it's.
Mm.
I think it is engineering. There's a large part of it is engineering. A large part of it is about precision and accuracy and exactness. Um, and but then I think that's also blended with art because I can build something, some piece of machinery for inside a tank, and if I'm completely useless at painting it, then it really doesn't matter how well I've built it, because it's the next stage that it's that finishing, it's the weathering, it's the difference between a factory fresh example, like a display model, like something from a museum where everything is immaculate, and something that looks like a real vehicle. Because whatever it is, I'm always amazed at as no sooner have you washed your car than it's immediately dirty because there's been a slight shower of rain and it's now collected all the dust that had settled on it that you hadn't noticed, and then you've got all these watermarks all over it and things, and you've just spent 3 hours polishing it and there it is dirty again. And that's just one example, and that's just the immediate thing, and that's the real art, I think, is where you can make something, whether it's telling a story or it's bringing the thing, it's convincing the viewer that this is a genuine functioning machine, whether it's an aeroplane or it's a tank or it's the inside of a tank. And the inside of a tank is my particular muse, I suppose, because it's a strange combination of engineering complexity and confined space with men moving around in it and living in it and sweating in it and spilling things and maintaining bits of it, and it's all going on there in that little box, and you've got to try and conjure that up in. I watched a little film clip the other day of one of the Ukrainian tank units, and the driver took the camera and brought it inside his compartment and looked down at he was doing something with the pedals, and you could see all around his feet in this T62 or whatever it was. I can't remember now. It was probably a T72, and there was leaves, and I think it was an empty drinks bottle and stuff, all just that had just come in with them getting in and out of the vehicle and just obviously no time to clear all that out. It's recreating that. It's making it look believable. That's the art. The engineering is the creation. The art is bringing it to life. Is giving it that realism.
I think that living space is a really important thing because, I mean, Ukrainian crews at the moment, they tend to be inside those tanks for hours at a stretch because if
Mm,
they get out, they'll be spotted by a drone. And it
mm,
was the same in World War II that
mm.
crews would spend a long time in the tank because if they got out, they might attract artillery attention. And I think that's something that quite often is missing realistically from people's models is that sense of the, stinky, horrible, sweaty holes that these places were for the crews that had to
Yeah,
sit in them for
yeah,
hours at a time.
yeah.
And I think you achieved it really well with your Panzer IV turret. I always think of the breach in that and how you were very logical about where you put the dirt for where it would actually reach and where it wouldn't and things.
Yeah, because there's also within that, oh, yes, they're living in this thing, it's filthy and all the rest of it, and the floor's dirty, and there's bits of, all of that's going on. But at the same time, there's other bits of it in there that nobody gets to touch even because they're inaccessible to the crew. There may be a film of dust sort of settled across bits of it, but then that's about it. There's nobody sort of going into that area to do anything particularly because they don't need to, but it still exists, and and then it's things like one thing I did in the turret that I don't think anybody can see really, but I know it's there. But I did a lot of sort of greasy finger marks.
Yeah. I was thinking of the handprint on the breach.
Yeah, well, when you drag if you got oil or grease on your hand and you put it down and then you lift your fingers off, you get like a lot, sort of 4 or 5 parallel lines where your fingers have moved. And I did a few of those effects around little bits. So they're not very visible, but they're there because I just thought that's the kind of thing that happens. And there's a similar one on one of that front hatches. There's a bit of a palm print you know, it's more visible there, and people do comment on that because it sort of catches the eye. People notice it as a little thing. But that's what lifts these things to that other layer. Because you could argue now that with this technology, all the skills that we developed for scratch building are kind of irrelevant now because, as you and I have discovered, once you've got to grips with that software, the sky's the limit. There's very little you can't do now in terms of what you want to do, um, and what you want to design and how straightforward that is. So that's if you wanted a model of something that isn't released, you and I could probably just draw it up ourselves. How we produce it is a different matter, but
I think having been a scratch builder, though, it's kind of like knowing how to swim before you ever get in the water. Because
yeah, no, I agree. I think I've always said that the reason I was able to pick it up, and I think you've been proof of that as well, that jump from traditional to computer generated design is far, far easier if you've got that background in being able to read a photograph, being able to judge proportion, being able to interpret and judge by eye and relative sizes and all that sort of stuff, and break things down into their component parts. And that skill has stood you and I in both in good stead in terms of that jump into the digital world. But what I'm saying is there's to be sort of triumphant about in that now.
yeah,
I get huge satisfaction out of it, but I haven't made it with my own hands as I once did. So it means that you and I can both do that, and so can anybody else who takes the time to learn and has that skill set. They can do that as well. What?
shh, be careful, don't let people know. It's like, this is our living. Shh.
But what isn't translatable is that bringing it to life, applying paint, making it look like the real thing. Does that look like polished steel, or does it look like you just brushed some metallic paint on it?
A lot of people that claim for realism, and I'm going to lay into the aircraft modelers again, but armor modelers as well to a certain extent, think, well, that chieftain was bronze green, so they painted bronze green and that's it.
Hmm.
But that doesn't necessarily make it look real. It just makes it look like the correct green tank. It's all the little things you do to it. I think, like you say, all the little handprints and stuff, or like all the little details, or how the metal polishes or abrades in some places. That's what adds that level that tricks the eye. That's what adds the realism.
So recently there was it must be 10 or 12 years ago now, probably if not a bit longer, I did a 16 scale Tiger 1 based on a series of well-known photos of this vehicle, which is covered in mud, but bits of it were dry mud and other bits of it were wet mud, and it had quite an unusual sort of brush painted camouflage pattern. And somebody else had built this model. It popped up on Facebook, and at first glance I thought, oh, it's my model, because it was the same thing. I think it was a different scale, but anyway. But then when I looked closer, I could see that the mud and the mud effects on it were nowhere near what was shown in the photograph. And it just made me think, well, why when that model was a gift, that vehicle was a gift, because you've got 2 or 3 photos of it from different angles, and you can, as a modeler, you can clearly see the wet mud, the dry mud, the pattern, the interface between the two, because the radiator box at the back is drying out the corner of the hull and the rest of it's still wet. And yet, so why wouldn't you refer to that when you're making that model? So just slapping mud all down the side of it. And that just is another example, I think, of just where realism pays dividends. If you replicate that exactly as it is in the photographs, you've got a winner straight away. And the reason it's a winner is because that's what it really looks like, instead of something that doesn't look like what it looks like. It has it automatically convinces you because it's based on the real thing. And if you haven't got that reference, then you go and find something. You find something else. You go, okay, I haven't got an exact picture of that, but I've seen vehicles where there's been a fuel spill on the deck, and then it's got coated in mud or dust, and that's changed the effect of that. But there's things you can then extrapolate and apply and give or recreate. I think that's the secret for me, is always go and or find something as close as you can to what you think it will look like and use that. Don't just guess, because a lot of that is what goes on in the, that's what separates,
Don't copy other models either.
Don't copy other models. Yeah. Don't just go, that'll do.
It's funny, actually, because I'm stuck on something at the moment. And the reason I'm stuck on it is because I want to add another few layers of visual interest to the thing I'm working on. But I need to go and research photos of the real one and close-up photos, so I can see sort of the patina on the armor and stuff before I carry on, because I know if I make it up, it will end up looking bad. It won't look good. It's easier, in a way, to research the real thing and to try and replicate it than it is to make it up convincingly. Do you think it's possible to make good models that don't strive to be accurate, where accuracy or realism is not the goal of a modeler?
Yes, there are, because there are people who do incredibly evocative or they tell a story in a way that it's impossible not to sort of react to. And it's not all about, I'm thinking about Per Olav Lund's whaling diorama from last year, which was just, is it accurate? I've no idea, because I don't know what whaling, sloops looked like, at that time. Does it convince me that was a whale, tipping the boat over with, yes, absolutely. It was an incredible model. Dynamic, and it just technically superb, creating the water, recreating the skin of the whale, the look of the boat. It was just setting a scene really with absolute command of everything, you know, um, as he always does. You know, the guy's an absolute genius for that sort of thing, you know, um, and a lesson for anybody, I think, who wants to see an example of what model making can be. There's so many I sometimes think, what are you doing making dirty tanks, you idiot? You know, you could be doing, you know, and maybe one day I will. Maybe I'll go and do something that's nothing to do with dirty military equipment. It'll be something else entirely. And occasionally a picture comes, I see a picture of something and I save it. And I think, I might make a model of that one day. But yeah, I think there are plenty of examples of that where the creativity is such that accuracy isn't the be all and end all.
I think if it's a single military vehicle, though, as I said earlier, that I'm kind of into the artistic side. If it's a single military vehicle, it's kind of like a prototypical image of something. So then I think there isn't really a lot of room there for artistry. It is more about accuracy.
Yeah, but then you get people. So here's going back to the Jeep, for want of a just as because it's a convenient reference point. So I know I would have made a great looking model there if I'd put a dark pin wash over every detail on it. It would have just popped and just gone. Would have looked great, fantastic. But it's operating in a desert environment, so there aren't going to be dark outlines around everything. There's actually going to be light outlines around everything. And try as I might, every time I've done a vehicle in that situation, you never get the same zing out of a pin wash that isn't dark. As you know, see if you're doing dust effects, you're just not going to get that kind of punch that you get out of putting a dark wash on, a dark pin wash around everything. And you know, there's times when I thought, oh, maybe I should just, but I can't now. I just think, no, that's not. And you see how many desert Panzer ones you see with a dark pin wash around everything. They're everywhere, and they look good because of that. But where's that? What's causing that dark wash around everything?
It's kind of one of my pet peeves, actually, because I mean, I used to put a dark wash around everything,
Mm.
and I still have to fight the urge to do it now because it's so ingrained to
Yeah,
do it as a
and it looks
model thing you do.
it immediately fixes your model. It looks great. It suddenly looks
But how does
50%
the
better.
shadow get on top of something that sticks out?
Yeah, it looks immediately. You go from something that looks flat and two dimensional. Suddenly, it's looking brilliant. Oh. I remember following Francois Verlinden's techniques back in the 70s when he was bringing all this stuff out, and the first time I tried it on it, I couldn't believe how great my model looked when I put a wash around and then dry
And
brushed it,
dry brushing as
dry
well.
brushed
Yeah.
the highlights. It just absolutely, he was jumping off the bench. But is it real? No, it's not. So you have to find then you have to find a way of making it real within those restrictions, which is a different thing, isn't it?
Well, there's your creativity. That's
So
where that
yeah,
comes in.
but I think if you're looking at a single vehicle, then and you'll still see it now. The you go along a competition table, and a lot of them will just have a dark wash on that's making them jump out. But does that make it a better model? Does that make it a more realistic model? I would argue it probably doesn't. I think there needs to be some variation in that.
I think, though, do you think we tend to follow each other a bit? I think even with the good shows, there's certain things that when we're judging, we get used to looking for.
Yeah, there's an accepted parlance of an accepted sort of like little chips around bits and this and that and rusty tracks and rubber rust streak here and um, yeah, there's definitely an accepted vocabulary of what makes a good model in people's eyes.
I think the danger of that is all models end up looking the same because everyone's trying to use the same language.
Well, they do. That's why Again, I'm flicking through social media today, and something came up. It was somebody had done like a color modulated vehicle, and it was just at the first. He just applied the paint basically, but it was all heavily color modulated. I thought, and it was like, oh god. But I thought I haven't seen one of those for a while because
Yeah, actually thinking about it, yeah.
because you don't. It's not a thing anymore. Um, Never was a thing for me, but it was a thing.
For a while, you couldn't move for it.
Yeah, but see, that used to sit with me and my focus on realism. I couldn't get over painting different parts of the tank, different shades of a particular colour, because that's not right. And then trying to blend them all into so they didn't look like they were different colours.
Mm. The one that got to me was the way they used to do really high contrast edges, like light edges,
Yeah.
and then transition it through to the darker color on the other side. But kind of like I've heard you say with non-metallic metal before, when they're reflecting things that aren't there, so the light reflections don't work. You look at them thinking, well, how is the light hitting this in order to do all those, make all those panels look like that? There must be like 10 different lights.
Hmm.
But because it was a very high contrast sort of attention grabbing style, I think it was very popular for a while.
It was, yeah, it was. I'm glad to see it on the way. Each to their own, I suppose. But um, from a realism perspective, I just don't think it was doing anybody any favours.
And like all styles, I think inevitably it ends up becoming a parody of itself. People go further and further and further with it until
Yeah,
it's way overdone,
yeah,
like they did with Linden and dry brushing.
yes, yeah, not exactly. Which is where realism brings you back. That's what you've got that break on it. For me, I always think, it stops you pushing and pushing and pushing for the sake of it to be different or dynamic or whatever it might be. Because is it real? If it's not, then that needs reining in, doesn't it? Did the thing actually look like that? Or as best as we can judge, did it look like that?
Do you think accuracy and realism are dying out a bit in the
Yeah,
age of the hyper,
yeah.
the better detailed kits and so on that we get?
I think so. Yeah, I think it's a lot easier not to have to worry about things because you're getting a better basic thing out of the box most of the time anyway. Or you can get away with a few little corrections or a few little improvements will make a big difference. But I think there's certain people who will push themselves to sort of look beyond that and want things to be as good as they can be, really, in terms of what they're doing and how correct it is. It's not my place to sort of tell people how they enjoy their hobby, but at the same time, I think that comes back to the whole rivet counter thing as well. There's a very broad spectrum of approach, isn't there? And the thing is, I think people who dare to point out a slight inaccuracy or a suggestion, they're not doing it to sort of stop anybody else's fun. They're just doing it to try and be helpful or to try and impart some advice, some helpful advice or knowledge. It's not just about undermining what's been done. But I think we're reaching the point sometimes where people just aren't saying anything at all because they're just
It's safer not to, isn't it?
safer just to shut up. Yeah,
Which is a shame.
I think so. Yeah, but then you get to know the people who are open to sharing the right knowledge, and
The only concern there is people new to it that want to learn.
yeah,
It's harder for them to find the people now who can help them. Because once you know the people, that's okay. But
yeah. Although we before the internet, didn't none of us had any of that anyway. It was just,
yeah, it's a circle. Although before the internet, we also didn't have 100 people telling us it was great, regardless of whether it was or wasn't.
yeah, no. I wonder what that would have done to me as a young man. Sort of, would I have just been happy with what I was doing then and just stuck with it because people were saying it's great, when or not? Probably not.
Probably not, because you'd see other people as a no, because you have a realistic ability to assess yourself
Yeah,
against the work of others, kind of thing.
yeah. This is the thing that the best. This is what I always say to people about rivet counting. The best modelers in the world, no matter who you pick, by and large, as a rule, the best modelers are rivet counters because it's that attention to fiddly little details or finishes or whatever it is. That's what makes them the best because they're putting that detail, they're putting that attention into what they're doing. They're not just going that's good enough. They're going no, it's not good enough. It needs to be. That elbow joint's not in the right place. I need to change that. It's not convincing me. Or no, that eye needs repainting because it's wonky from the one next to it, or whatever it is. The best modelers are rivet counters.
Perhaps rivet counters are people who don't accept mediocrity in their own work, for want of a better phrase. People who aren't willing to just go, that'll do.
Yeah, don't let themselves off.
Mhm.
Yeah.
All right, so who are your favourite rivet counters?
See this. I'm going to caveat this with the fact that I will remember several other people who I would like to include on this on my list 20 minutes after the interview finishes. So,
It's always the way. I'm the same.
um, people that I look up to and whose work I really admire. So I'm going to call out. He's probably not as well known as some people. I'm calling out Legion Shoot, who was building his King Tiger at about the same time as mine, and he was always a little bit ahead of me, which was a little bit frustrating. But it was also quite helpful because he kind of solved a few problems before I got to them. But he doesn't make a big song and dance about what he does. Some people might have seen he's been doing a similar thing with the SDKSO 251 16 scale. A lot of scratch building, a lot of extra detailing, some of my parts, and just he doesn't his painting and finishing style is quite subdued. There's not a lot of fancy things going on there. It's quite sort of toned down in that respect, but just the guy he he's never satisfied with anything as it comes. If it's not right, then he'll fix it, doesn't matter what bit of it it is. And the finished things are just phenomenal. He's just an absolute craftsman. He's brilliant. So there's him. Uh, who else? I'm thinking Roger Hertmans because
Mm.
Roger's the diorama builder I wish I was. he just he can he builds a brilliant he'll build your you could take the vehicle out of his diorama and it's a standalone class winner there. But then he puts it in a diorama. It's always beautifully crafted. The buildings are just as good as the vehicle, if not better. And then they're populated by all these figures, and they're not just stock figures. He's modified them all, or he's sculpted them, so they're all individual poses. They're all telling a story. They're all exquisitely painted. It's just oh, every little one is. And not only that, really irritatingly, seems to turn them around in a matter of sort of weeks and months. Something that would take me years to finish, he's rattled off in like a couple of weeks. It seems to. One minute there's this is the thing I'm doing, and then there it is, all finished and painted. So absolute genius. I'm going to call out Megas as well. Megas with his scrap built aircraft because oh my word, I mean, I've had the real privilege of going to his house and sitting there talking about his models, and he's showed me some of the stuff he's done and how he's done it. And I mean, to build a Sterling bomber from absolutely nothing, just just incredible. And he's another one who just the level of finesse, the finishing, the weathering. There's no corners are cut. It's all has to be right. even every little angle is checked and measured, and it's just, he is for me the best aircraft modeler in the world. Like, because he scratch builds it all, and then he finishes it to that exceptional standard. He paints models like nobody else, model airplanes that look, and he's not afraid to have them covered in oil or exhaust fumes or whatever it is. He just because he's an aircraft engineer, he knows what he's doing with all of that as well. It's just right down to sort of. I still remember the big balloon tires on one of those four-engine bombers, with big puddles of dripped oil on top of the tire, because that's what he'd observed that, and that's what he replicated. So yeah, he's an absolute star as well.
Well, someone I think you would probably say, I'm putting words in your mouth now. We both know him. You know him better than me, I think. Franz Lubin.
Oh yes, yeah, yes, absolutely, yeah. No, he's another one. See him and people like him and Megas are on another level with airplanes. Just doing, because I think with aircraft, and I don't rate my aircraft models anywhere near like I do with my armor. But I think once you get to a certain level of skill and ability, then there should be this step up into a different sort of stratosphere of what you're doing, and these guys are doing that. They're going that extra level with these things, and yeah, no, you're absolutely right. As I said, as soon as we finish, I'm going to think of a whole list of people. I'd be embarrassed that I haven't remembered now, but so I apologise to everybody.
Plus, if you're listening and think it's you, yes, you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And if I bumped into you in the next show, it's definitely you.
Don't worry, no one listens to this show. So you're safe.
No, but there's once you start, Fabio Sacchi and his what he does with his. I mean, he's another guy. You can scratch build anything he wants.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's one of those people as well who isn't nearly as well known as they should be.
No, he's an absolute genius.
A gentleman too.
He's the nicest guy you could hope to meet, and not only can he scratch build and he puts everything right, he fixes all the things he needs to fix, and then he pulls off this master stroke paint finish at the end of it. But again, it's not all shouty, it's not all effects, it's not modulated this and high contrast that. It's just, this is what these things look like, and you look at it and go, that is what I can see. This is exactly what these things would have looked like. And it's like you've turned that black and white image into a color image. You've thought about it. It's all balanced. And that's the difference. That's for me. That's where these guys are really. It's because it's about realism, and that's why it's so convincing. And it's not about fancy effects or trendy styles, but it is about replicating reality in miniature. Definitely.
It's ironic that it's one of the hardest things to do, yet one of the least showy ways you can do it.
Yeah, a lot of these models just get overlooked because they're not all dark pin washes and chippy this, that, and the other, and But and we've featured his work in the magazine so many times just because along with a lot of other people. We the list could go on and on. There's so many people doing really, really excellent work, and a lot of them flying completely under the radar because they're not making a song and dance about what they're doing or giving it a name. It's they're getting on and doing what they do, but doing it really, really well.
All right, I ask this to everyone, and it's the most horrible question in all of modelling, potentially. Why do you think we actually make these little things?
Oh, that is a very good question. I can only speak for myself in that I've always had some innate fascination with miniatures, whether it was sort of toy cars or model train sets or whatever it was when I was a boy. Um, uh, and it always has fascinated me and always will, I think. The question is why, though, isn't it? I think there are things that I can identify about it that are particular to me that make it what it is. So it's something I can do on my own, so I don't have to socially integrate with anybody else to do it. It's something that has a lot of sort of mindfulness about it, i.e., when you're doing that, you can't be worrying about other things. So that's very helpful. It's not dependent on the weather, so I can do it whenever I want to. It's not a seasonal thing. It doesn't depend on other people. It's something I have absolute control over, and it's become something I'm very good at. So I think we bring all those things together, I think. And, I know I've got some Asperger's syndrome going on, so it sits very nicely with that kind of personality. And it gives me a great deal of, so there's a particular, when I was a boy and I was making models, if I was particularly pleased with how something was coming on, I was halfway through it. So my equivalent of posting on social media back then, I suppose, and my parents would kind of go, "You've got to stop now because you've been in there making your models all day. Come down and watch the telly." And I'd bring the thing I was working on and put it on the mantelpiece or on the table next to me, so I could keep looking at it whilst watching the TV or whatever it was. And then I'd be turning it around to see it from. That's how obsessed I was with that creative thing. And I still am today. I get absolutely focused on a thing, and just the look of it sometimes, just like I've got a half-built 251 sitting on the desk next to me here, and I keep glancing across at it. It just looks so cool. It's a complete mess. It's hanging off it and all sorts because I'm using it to sculpt figures, so it's nowhere near finished. It's just a real build mule for posing figures in. But just, there's something about it.
It's going to sound weird now, but I kind of feel like I fall in love with every project. If I don't, it never gets finished. I'm just not feeling it.
I would agree with that. Yeah, there's an absolute, there has to be some of that. Otherwise, it doesn't get done. Yeah.
But once you do, you're constantly kind of looking at it, thinking about it. And the funny thing is, once it's over, love them and leave them, on to the next one.
Yeah, because that becomes the new focus. But,
yeah.
But how I managed to do that for 7.5 years, I'm not quite sure. But I did.
Well, David, this has been fantastic, and it's gone on much longer than I said it would, so apologies for that.
Thanks, Chris, for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
I really enjoyed that chat with David, and there's a lot that I hope many people will take from that. Maybe think about how they work and how they do things. Even if you decide you don't want to go for total realism yourself, there's always something you can learn from people that do, especially from the rivet counters, who, as David says, are a much maligned group within the hobby. Next episode, I've got a very special interview. Two of my good friends to interview each other. So we have Marijn van Gils and Barry Biediger from the Small Subjects podcast will be interviewing each other about storytelling and about dioramas and everything else in between. Remember, you can find a transcript of this episode, including links, photos and everything else at the modelphilosopher.com blog. Thanks for joining me. Take care.